Well, hello and welcome to the Cultured Bumpkin. Today we have Lisa Weakland from the Historical USA podcast.
Yes.
She's a great aficionado of history and a kindred spirit in that way. And today we're going to talk about we're going to talk about her, and then we're going to talk about one of her favorite speeches.
Yes.
Lisa, very much for being on the Cultured Bumpkin.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Can you tell us a little about yourself? Why do you like it, etc.?
So my name is Lisa. I am the host of the Historical USA Road to Revolution podcast. It's a narrative on American history. We start from the foundation. So this first season, we talk all about the social movements, the economic movements. We've talked about the Enlightenment, the Great Awakening, a lot of the colonial wars that are setting up for the colonists to declare independence in 1776. So this really is just a foundational season. So if you want to understand why we hold our founders' wisdom in such high regard and kind of where they were coming from when they created those documents, this is a good podcast for you. I also host History Hour, which thank you for coming on History Hour. That episode will be released soon. And that's just an hour that we talk to your favorite historians, content creators, authors, just get to know other people in the space and build the history community. And I also have a YouTube channel called Historical USA, and I do a historical road trip series where I kind of vlog my adventures. The last one was Gettysburg. So
A couple of those were great.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. I'm really proud of those. That's a new medium that I'm getting into, is the vlogging space. And then, of course, I run Historical USA on TikTok and Instagram and Facebook. And I have done short form videos for about 3 years. So if you're interested in that, you can go follow me over there.
That sounds great. So with regard to the revolution, I think a lot of people are not familiar with the revolution at all. And so ideas that I keep hearing, and I would like to hear your answer to, is one, that the revolution was started by racist white guys and they all owned slaves and wrote the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. So we should disregard everything they ever did or said and only look forward into the future. What do you agree or disagree, and why?
I disagree with that. I think that when you really look at who our founding fathers were, especially when you look at the Declaration of Independence, I had mentioned earlier to you that 14 of those men that signed the Declaration of Independence had never owned slaves. Many of them will end generational slavery either before their death or upon their death. When we signed the Declaration, or when we had signed the United States Constitution, Rhode Island had come in as a free state, with several states soon to follow in freedom. The abolitionist movement starts with the English colonies. It does not start in England. It starts here. Almost, if you watch my podcast on slavery, almost simultaneously as we are bringing African slaves into the colonies, a movement is forming to end that slave trade. There are a lot of Quaker influences in that. The Fellowship of Friendship, started by the Quakers, was really the first abolitionist group in the 1750s. Benjamin Franklin, who had previously owned about 3 slaves in his younger years, will become a staunch abolitionist. And along with Benjamin Rush, they will find an abolitionist society in Philadelphia. You'll have John Jay and Alexander Hamilton that will establish a manumissions society in New York. So very early on, our founders, even George Washington, understood that slavery as a practice could never survive in the United States. And there's a lot of interest. There was a lot of money to be made with slavery. And I think we can see that the South was making quite a bit of money within the slave trade and holding on to their slaves. And I think that money for a lot of people makes the world go round. And unfortunately, those interests kind of overtook what the founders had wanted. You look at the constitutional debates, Gouverneur Morris railed for hours against the southern states that wanted to preserve slavery within the Constitution. And he said, absolutely not. You have George Mason, who was the largest slave owner in Virginia, that refused to sign the United States Constitution if they did not settle that question of slavery right then and there. Because I think in their wisdom, they knew that there would be a civil war over this, even back then in 1787. They knew that if slavery continued to exist, that it would cause a deep enough divide, even then. And it did. 600,000 men died in a civil war to end the practice of slavery, and a good untold innocents died during Reconstruction. So America has paid dearly for that, for slavery, and we continue to today.
That's right. Yeah. The Bible says the love of money is the root of all evil.
Mm-hmm.
When you apply that verse to something like slavery, it's like, even you don't have to be a Christian or believe the Bible, but it's like, that's kind of.
And it really, a lot of it was money. I spoke a lot about this. The South was actually, in terms of slavery in those early years before the Declaration of Independence, it was cheaper to buy Native American slaves. So the Native American tribes, just like African tribes in Africa, bought and sold slaves. And it was cheaper for a long time to buy Native American slaves or to enter into white servitude, to buy a white indentured servant to bring people over. And really, those early years in the 18th century the labor was mainly dominated by white indentured servants and Native American slaves. It's not until the latter half of the 18th century when the British take over the Asiento contract after the War of Jenkins' Ear that they start bringing in African slaves into the English colonies in droves. Not that they weren't there before, but like I said, it was cheaper to buy a Native American slave than it was to buy a Black slave. And after those contracts start to change hands, that's kind of where the African slave trade began to explode in places like South Carolina and Georgia.
Yeah, I think we've both been to the Custom House on East Bay Street in Charleston, where they used to, it'd be unload folks off the ship and sell them.
Well, they, they're building in Charleston, they're building a International Black Museum. And they allegedly chose the spot to build that in the spot where those slave ships were coming into Charleston Harbor and unloading those African slaves.
Hmm.
So they chose that spot to build that museum.
You mentioned earlier a quote from Martin Luther King about what was it? What was that?
The Declaration of Independence being a promissory note.
Okay. So walk me from there into the piece we're doing today and set up the speech. You know what I'm saying? kind of the importance of this war that was being fought, and then starting with a starting point being that amazing quote.
So, the Revolutionary War, I think that we like to equate in our minds that the Revolutionary War was fought by white men. And I think that could not be further from the truth. Um, there were a lot of Native Americans, there were a lot of free people of color, slaves, and you can argue on whether all of them were there for the right reasons, but they did fight in this war um, because of those ideals of freedom and liberty that the Declaration of Independence promised. You know, Thomas Paine was a great pamphletist. He was you know, he really believed in that, and I think that the people that were fighting believed that we had lived under tyranny for so long that it was time for a change. We could no longer live under tyranny anymore. Um, and so the speech that I had given you to read, George Washington's address to the troops on August 26th, 1776, the Declaration of Independence had just been signed, and we were going to be fighting in New York. And uh, one soldier had said when he looked out and saw the British Navy on their way to New York, it was as if the whole Navy was afloat. I mean, they were just going to be facing an insurmountable task. The biggest superpower in the world was about to come down upon these farmers, you know, these merchants, these tradesmen that were poor. Um, and it's my favorite because George Washington, this speech to me, it embodies not just those men and their sentiments, but today. It transcends time. You know, it is a speech about fighting against tyranny and fighting for your rights, fighting for the rights of the future, for your family. Um, and I think that's so important. And it really inspired these men to carry out essentially a miracle, the miracle of New York. George Washington was not supposed to escape New York. Actually, I think my camera I'm going to change it really quick. My battery, my camera just stopped. Ah. Okay. But it really was a miracle. George Washington was not supposed to escape Manhattan, and he did. Now, there is some reasons for that. He was facing the Howe brothers in New York. And I don't know if you know the story about that. William Howe's older brother fought in the French and Indian War and
Richard,
had died.
Or Richard was the Navy guy, right?
Yes. So William Howe was the commander over the British regulars in New York. And Richard was, I believe, an admiral in the Navy. But their older brother had fought here in the French and Indian War. And he died here and is buried here in the United States now. But they did not understand why they were fighting this war against the colonists, because they had utmost respect for the British colonists. They had treated their brother as a hero and had given him a full, honorable burial, and very much respected their brother, and the leadership that he had given to the colonists and the respect that he had given to the colonists. Because, the British looked at us here in the Americans as second-class citizens a lot of times. So, George Washington, all he ever wanted was to be a commander in the in the British Army, and they denied him over and over and over again, and because he was an American. And there's a lot of debate over that too, but they really didn't treat the colonists with the same amount of respect, but General Howe did. So a lot of historians speculate that the Howe brothers might have allowed Washington to escape out of respect for what the colonists had done for their brother.
Mm.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know what I think about that.
Yeah.
The what happened to William Howe at Bunker Hill? I think he was a good man.
Mm-hmm.
And he had an iron backbone. And he was a good soldier that follows orders even if he doesn't think they're a good idea.
Well, he didn't want to. In fact, I believe he wrote a note to Parliament saying, I don't know why we're doing this.
Right.
We need to be negotiating that with them over this. And Parliament, I mean, I think to the British's credit, a lot of the members in Parliament did not want to fight us. Edmund Burke comes to mind as probably the most staunch British MP that was against the revolution. And there was a lot of discussion in England if this was the right thing to do.
Yeah. So I don't know. Like, it'd be interesting I would like to hear that case. I really haven't heard anybody lay that case out, but I think that's totally plausible. I think kind of what I've always thought is, the way that, Bunker Hill was dearly bought. He lost a lot of guys with a full frontal assault on Bunker Hill. And
yeah, it's hard to go up that hill when you're getting, rained down upon with artillery and infantry fire. That's really, really hard to watch. And all your guys mowed down like that.
One of the guys, in the town of Charlestown, which is right next to Breed's Hill, great place to flank through. You'd had some cover, but a fellow named John Stark, who I live in Starkville, Mississippi, and it's named he held the town. They couldn't get through the town. They had to go right open field up the hill. And anyway, they lost so many guys that I wonder if he wasn't like, man, I don't like throwing men into a meat grinder like that. Now, I know that wasn't the first time that had happened, and it wouldn't be the last even for him, but you just wonder, maybe he was a decent enough man. He's like, you know what, you corner this Washington guy and he's liable to, you lose a hand, trying to stick it in there and grab him. I don't know. So I don't know. That's interesting. I hadn't really thought about it being actually, what we're gonna sneak out. But either way, Washington doesn't know any of this.
No.
This speech is pretty good.
Yeah. Washington, he gave a lot of those. The Newburgh Address is also one of my favorites as well. Inspiring his officers and really touching them emotionally. His farewell address also is really, really emotional. He was a hard man. He was a hard general. He was hard on his men at times, but he really loved his men, and he was a great example in leadership in that way, that he could not only, he inspired a lot of his officers, inspired a lot of them. Although there was many times they tried to get rid of him.
Right.
I mean, he like George Washington, it's a miracle he lived as long as he did.
Yeah.
Because this is a guy that had many, many near-death experiences, and his own bodyguards conspired against him to get rid of him. As did a lot of his generals, Conway and what's the guy from New York? I forgot his name. He was at Saratoga. Shoot.
Arnold?
Big general, not Arnold. Why am I blanking on his name? I'm going to remember in the middle of the night and yell it out. I know somebody in the comments will probably say who it is. But shoot. I don't know why I'm forgetting his name. Not Lawrence. He was from Massachusetts. Benjamin Rush and a few others tried to get rid of Washington for this guy.
Charles Lee?
No, not Charles Lee. Horatio Gates. Horatio Gates, yep. I knew it was one of those guys.
Yeah, Horatio Gates. Living down near Camden, we used to, we'd go up to Charlotte and go to eat or whatever. That joker galloped from there to Charlotte without stopping, with his men just getting, whacked back behind him.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a long drive. That's an hour driving 70 miles an hour. Rode his horse and then, got to Charlotte and was like, whew, okay, I've just, this is a tactical retreat in order to reorganize or whatever. I don't like it.
Yeah. Yeah. Horatio Gates, I think, to be honest, Horatio Gates, his military record was better than Washington's. And I can see why people wanted him to command the Continental Army over Washington. But like you said, we the South was really hard to kind of rein in. And so having someone from Virginia kind of helped strengthen that unity between the North and the South.
Yeah, I agree. You kind of have you have your foot in both camps. You're familiar with the upper crust and New Yorkers and Bostonians, but also the planter class people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So anyway, the speech before Long Island. Yes.
The time is now near at hand which must probably determine whether Americans are to be free men or slaves, whether they are to have any property they can call their own, whether their houses and farms are to be pillaged and destroyed, and themselves consigned to a state of wretchedness from which no human efforts will deliver them. The fate of unborn millions will now depend, under God, on the courage and conduct of this army. Our cruel and unrelenting enemy leaves only the choice of a brave resistance or the most abject submission. We have, therefore, to resolve to conquer or to die. Our country's honor call upon us for a vigorous and manly exertion, and if we now shamefully fail, we shall become infamous to the whole world. Let us then rely on the goodness of our cause, and the aid of the Supreme Being, in whose hands victory is, to animate and encourage us to great and noble actions. The eyes of all our countrymen are now upon us, and we shall have their blessings and praises, if happily we are the instruments of saving them from the tyranny meditated against them. Let us therefore animate and encourage one another, and show the whole world that a free man, contending for liberty on his ground, is superior to any slavish mercenary on earth. Liberty, property, life, and honor are all at stake. Upon your courage and conduct rest the hopes of our bleeding and insulted country. Our wives, children, and parents expect safety from us alone, and they have every reason to believe that heaven will crown with success so just a cause. The enemy will endeavor to intimidate by show and appearance, but remember, they have been repulsed on various occasions by a few brave Americans. Every good soldier will be silent and attentive, wait for orders, and reserve his fire until he is sure of doing execution.
Well, I can see why that was one of your favorite speeches. That was amazing. So what happened after that?
So, they get out of New York, and they kind of get chased around a little bit. And like you said, I think that the war was really won in the South. And so Cornwallis, he kind of turns his attention to the South, not only because there were more loyalists there, for one, and two, the South had been the 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 Indian Wars in the colonial period, French and Indian War, never stopped in the South. And so the Southerners, they were fighting. Not only were they having to deal with the Spanish in Florida, but they were having to deal with the Native Americans in the frontier, and the French as well. So the South was always a very volatile place. And so I think the fact that there were so many loyalists in the South, the British kind of turned their attention towards that. And there's a lot of skirmishes going on and everything. And yeah, so we had that, and I think that's where the bulk of the activity was. But you have New Jersey, and they escape to Brooklyn Heights, and then you have the Battle of White Plains, which is coming up here, which is actually on my birthday. But that's kind of where the legend of Sleepy Hollow comes from, is the Battle of White Plains, and then the Hessian mercenary that loses his head to a cannonball. So it's a very interesting place, but yeah, the Revolutionary War, I mean, this is the beginning. So we've got a whole couple of years here before, the surrender at Yorktown.
Right. Well, if people, hear you and say, man, that is fast. Didn't know that, or I love that, I want to hear more, and that kind of thing, where can people come to hear your podcast, watch you on YouTube, etc.?
So you can find me on YouTube. It's Historical USA. I am also on Spotify and Apple, Historical USA. You can also find me on Instagram and TikTok. I've done a lot of videos on the founders, the founding fathers. I did a whole Forgotten Founders series. Like I said, I'm on TikTok and Facebook. If you want to check out, I'm also on Rumble. So if you're not into YouTube, you can find me on Rumble as well. Historical USA, everywhere.
And all of these will be in the show notes. So if
Yeah.
any of these, just look into the show notes of wherever you're seeing this, and it'll be there.
I do actually also have a Substack, and I have published a few papers over there. I think the last one was The Changing American Ways of War and how it changes after World War II. I posted a paper on that as well. So if you're interested in how our military evolved and our government evolved after World War II, that's a good read.
Okay. Very.
Yeah. But thank you so much for having me on.
I really appreciate it. And yeah, we'll definitely have you back on to talk about some more history stuff soon. But thank you so much for coming on today.
Yeah, you're so welcome.